Good morning, Warzone kids. Or maybe today I should say, Good morning, Judas! Judas! Traitor! Betrayer! Buster, Buster, Buster! Those are all names that I've been called by other adults as an adult. And I can see why. I've spent about 2 decades of my life, about 10 years on each side of a little world in American society, which is a very sharp divide, which is organized labor. I was, for about the first half of that period, about 10 years, I was an elected leader, treasurer, and then president, well, shop steward, and then treasurer, and then president of a statewide union, kind of an umbrella group that had several different local unions as part of it. Did that for about 10 years. And then at the end of that, I moved into consulting on the other side, on the management side. The technical name for the thing that I do most often is that I work as what the Department of Labor calls a persuader, which I think is a cooler name than an influencer. An influencer just nudges you along, but a persuader persuades you. And the irony is that after living in this world for about 20 years, you can't really persuade people of things. People persuade themselves. And it's the kind of a world which really taps into one of the deepest elements of our nature as a human being, which is that, on the one hand, we have this strong individualistic element to us as human beings. On the other hand, we have this strong collective impulse. You can refer to it as tribal or clans or in-group, out-group. You can use lots of language around this, but somehow or another, as human beings, we have this strong individualistic element, and we have this strong kind of tribal or group element where we where we get some of our identity from the group that we're in, and we project our identity on that group, and then we define other groups in terms of how they relate to our group, all that kind of thing. It's just deep in the nature of who we are as human beings, as best as I can tell. And the world of organized labor very much exhibits that in the workplace, because the way the law is set up, there is an election. There's a yes vote or a no vote on whether you want the union or don't want the union. And this is a question which sharply divides folks. The world is a complicated place, but when there's an election in front of you with a binary question on it, you have to take all the complexities and boil them down into either a yes vote or a no vote. Usually, in the work site, this leads to two groups of people. Those that voted yes, those that voted no by the time the whole thing's said and done. They didn't start out as two groups of people. They started out as one group, the people who work there. When you get done, after election day, you have the people who work there and voted yes on this thing, and the people who work there and voted no on this thing. And one of those groups is way happier than the other. The world of organized labor brings this kind of tribal element into sharp relief so that you can really see it and how it works. So it's not any kind of surprise that when someone goes from one side to the other side, it triggers a lot of that. Judas, betrayer, all that, 30 shekels, stuff like that. Because to the folks that are just, rank and file members of those tribes, that's how it looks. They've identified with the tribe, and the other person has identified with the tribe, and then you've switched back and forth. And it wouldn't really make a whole lot of difference if it was the other way around. So I can absolutely understand it. That doesn't make it any more pleasant for me as a person to get called names. Sometimes I feel like if people wanted to cut closer to the bone and call a name, they could make fun of my teeth, or they could call me a lard butt or something like that. That would probably hurt worse because of the fact that this divide, this question, just looks much different to me now than it does or than it did when I first got into it. Because my views and my opinions of this whole world that I've spent most of my working life in, my views and opinions of that world are formed by my experience in it. And my experience on the union side of things was not particularly typical. Most folks that are involved in a union are involved as an activist in the place where they work. Their opinions are based on their experience. And my experience was just much different than that. The best way to communicate what my experience of that whole thing is like, comes from a movie called The War Room, which was a documentary that came out in the 90s about the 1992 presidential election campaign between Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush. That was the A story of that documentary, the story of that campaign. The B story in that film was really about the strange relationship between the campaign managers for either side. James Carville was the campaign manager for Bill Clinton. Mary Matlin was the campaign manager for George H.W. Bush. And James Carville and Mary Matlin were married to each other. And they were a big deal in the 90s. They would go on talk shows and they would kind of hype this up and kind of play into this idea that they must just be like the Bickersons at home. Like, what's that like? You've got a hardcore Democratic activist and a hardcore Republican activist, and they go home every night and do what? Bicker about trade policy and abortion all night, and then sullenly just turn out the lights and go to bed, finding the bigness in their heart to forgive their wayward partner for their errant views. Now, I have no idea what their relationship is like, but I very much doubt it was anything like that, because their experience of politics is not like that of just a voting citizen, even a really active voting citizen. I live in Vermont, which is a small state, and it's very easy to get quite involved in politics. You can go down to the State House in Montpelier, and you can probably find your legislator that day and have a word with them. If you have ever contacted a legislator in any way, shape, or form about some issue that you care about, just by virtue of that fact, you're like in the top 10% of active citizens in politics. And yet still, your experience of politics is going to be very, very different than it would be if you were that legislator, him or herself, or a lobbyist, or some other sort of advocate who went to work under the Golden Dome in Montpelier every day and was involved in politics at that level. There'd just be very different experiences. And so it seems dead obvious to me that James Carville and Mary Matlin, they're campaign professionals. Their experience of politics is consumed with questions about voter ID and getting out the vote and targeting voters and getting their message out and dealing with 50 different sets of internal state political parties and policy and what happens in the news on a daily basis and how they're going to get their guy across the finish line in the face of all that. That's what their experience of politics is like. And so James Carville and Mary Matlin live much more in the same world of campaign professionals than they do in the two different worlds of a Democratic activist and a Republican activist, if that makes sense. That, to me, paints a pretty good picture of my experience on the two sides of this world. I was treasurer of that union for 3 years, and I was president for 6 years. And during all that time, I was really neck deep in the internal workings of the union and how the union does what it does. If I gave you $1 million and said, here, go organize some workers, you'd have to sit down and figure out what to do with it. There's not a switch you can flip. $1 million equals 1 million new workers organized into the union. Flip it. It just doesn't work like that. What would you spend the money on? Where would you try to get these workers from? How would you get them into the union? How would you know whether you were succeeding or failing? Where would you start? What industry? Where would you go first? Open up the phone book? Acme garage door openers. Let's see if they want to join the union. How would it work? What would you do? How would you hire an organizer? What do organizers do? How do they do it? How can you tell a good one from a bad one? These are all the questions that consumed my mind for a long stretch of time. And these are just not questions that even many of the most hardcore union activists that are rank and file activists at their shop ever have to think about at all. But they consumed my most of my waking hours for a long period of time. And after I got done, after I spent 10 years doing that, the whole thing just looked much different than it did when I got into it. And I had just had enough. I'd done it long enough. And I found that I had a decade of experience and expertise, really, in this very small, little known, even less well understood area of American politics and society, which is the worksite and organized labor. Not many people have even the vaguest idea how that actually works and what it's like, what the rules and regs are. And that's a recipe for working as a consultant, for working on the management side when organizations need someone with skills and experience in that world to help them navigate it. Because believe it or not, most employers who don't already have a union in the shop have very little reason to understand how the law works. And I also found that I really enjoyed being around organizing campaigns. And that's also a strange thing. It's like living in a briar patch. It's thorny. There's a lot of contempt. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of contention. Anytime you have an election system, which is what that world is for my purposes, there's a federally regulated election system where people can vote for the employer or they can vote for the union. Anytime you have a situation like that, it's going to bring out strong feelings on both sides. And it's going to kind of take that work site that was one group of people and pull it towards being two groups of people. And that's what labor organizing is. The art and science of taking one group of employees in the work site and turning them into two groups. And on the union side, when you're in a position like I was, that just puts you in a certain kind of stance toward those voters or those members. They're all targets. You've got to approach them in a way where you're always trying to get them across the next finish line. We got to get those cards signed. We got to get a yes vote. Then we got to get a contract. Then we got to think about trying to get a good contract. And then we got to try to get another contract. And then we got to try to dream up some way to keep the union alive and vibrant in some kind of way during the period in between that. And it just unavoidably puts you in a certain kind of stance toward the workers, toward the voters, the members. And I had just had enough of that. I didn't like how that felt to me after a long time. And I got out of it. There was certainly a period of time shortly after I left the union world when I was somewhat warm emotionally about it. I had lots of great experiences. I had lots of very hard experiences on that side. I certainly had some element of utopian views when I got into it, and none of those survived my time in the union side of things. But when I got out, I didn't think unions were bad. I thought they were human organizations that did human things. We like some of those things. We don't like some of those things. But they're human organizations, and they do human things, for better or worse, and both. After a long stretch of time working on the corporate side of things, working for organizations, those organizations are human organizations. They're neither all good nor all bad. They're human organizations. They do human things. And it's really not more complicated than that. There's a phrase that you run into a lot if ever you are part of any kind of social movement or any kind of community organizing or anything like that, labor organizing, anything with the word organizing in it, you're going to run into a phrase, theories of change. It's a really interesting phrase, and it's very telling because it really gets to the heart of things. Any kind of labor organizing, which is the kind I have the most direct experience of, is got to be about the art and science of getting groups of people to take some specific action. That's what it has to be in the labor organizing kind of thing. The law defines it. You've got to get to this benchmark. You've got to get these numbers of cards signed. You've got to win a vote. You've got to somehow get a contract. To do all these things requires everybody to be going in the same direction. So on the union side of things, as an organizer, what you're learning is the art and science of how to get everybody to go in that direction, which is the one that you as an organizer have decided is best for them to go in. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing that job. So theories of change are all about how do we change other people to get them to do things that are like the things we want them to do. And the theory of change in labor organizing, really, at the core, is change through conflict. The union has to work toward conflict in the form of, will you sign these cards or will you not sign these cards? Will you vote yes or will you not vote yes? We're all going to find out. Will you do X, Y, and Z or will you not do X, Y, and Z? How do we get people to come up with the answers we want them to come up with to those questions? That's what I mean in terms of the stance that puts you in with regard to other people. And after a long time, I just didn't like that stance anymore, really. And I found that the thing I had mostly changed after doing that and applying myself to learning those arts, the thing I had mostly changed was myself. Because I had spent so long in that stance toward people of regarding them as targets and how do we get them to go to the right place. Right, meaning the place that we want them to go. I didn't like how that felt as a human being. Certainly after I left the union, I carried that stance with me, but it didn't last very long, really, because I found that I still didn't like how that felt. If I went to a meeting and there was an organizing campaign going on, and I had the view of trying to persuade, trying to change all these folks' minds, that's very oppositional. And it carries with it, like, I have the idea that they should be against the union, and I will now impose that on them by hook or by crook. That's not really any different. And it leads a person into all kinds of oppositional relationships with folks. You're still regarding them as targets, just targets going in a different direction. That didn't really last very long for me. And I can tell you now that it's been years since I've been in anything like really a contentious meeting. And I do small group meetings for a living. I've done thousands of them. And it's been years since I had a contentious one. There have been people in meetings that I've led who were contentious, but I just don't really contend back because I regard them differently now. Things I've learned working around elections for a long time, however many voters there are, that's how many different sets of opinions and experiences there are that lead these people to go to the polls and vote up or down. They bring their whole life with them. That's really what's going on. These folks are adults. They have to live in a complicated world, and they've got a choice in front of them. How are they going to vote on this union question? Some people already know that they're going to vote yes on the union anytime they see one on a ballot because of their experience of life. Other people just know that they're going to vote no on the union anytime they see one on a ballot, and that's because of their experience of life. They're adults. They have a complicated, complex decision in front of them. And if I regard them as my fellow human creatures who are in that position, there's no contention necessary. I understand that there's hot feelings, and sometimes people that are strongly for the union side don't even like the fact that there's someone like me around. That's okay. Many people who feel very strongly that they don't want the union, they don't like the fact that there's a union around. We all have to live in a world where there's things happening that we don't like. What's the answer to that going to be? What's a person's response to that going to be? That's been my stance toward the workers, that they're my fellow human creatures. They're adults with a complex decision in front of them. What I found is that when I engage respectfully with my fellow human creatures, they respond respectfully back, overwhelmingly. This is especially true today in this environment we live in where the entire country begins to resemble the kind of agitation that, I recognize as being about, 4 or 5 days away from a union election. The heat is getting very high. People are less and less interested in regarding each other as just their fellow human creatures and citizens that are going to vote differently on election day. And they begin seeing each other as parts of a different group or different tribe. And that gives me an uneasy feeling because I don't like that. I don't really like where that goes in workplaces, and I don't really like where it goes in the broader society. And I think in general, we're all better off if we engage respectfully with each other and honor the fact that we each bring our life experience to decisions like this. Every moment of the day, we bring our entire life experience to that moment. And the world that I live in is radically different now than it was when I first got into labor consulting or when I was on the union side. The world I live in is radically different now. I don't live in a world full of contention and trying to figure out how to drag people across the finish line. I just don't. That's not what it looks like to me. I just don't live in that world anymore. And I thought about theories of change somewhere along the way. And I thought about the way that during the period of my life that I spent trying to change the world, what mostly changed in the world during the period of time that I approached my fellow human creatures as targets that I needed to drag across some finish line, what I mostly changed was myself. I put myself in a position that I didn't like toward my fellow human creatures. I doubt very much that we changed the world in any particular way that lasted, but I did change myself in a way that lasted. It took me a long time to get out from under. And what I found was that as I allowed myself to change, as I myself changed, the world around me changed. I go to work now and I do the same things, but I go to work in a different world. Because I engage respectfully with my fellow human creatures, that tends to be overwhelmingly how they engage back with me. And if they're not in a place where they can do that, if they're so spitting mad about something that they can't engage respectfully, that's okay. We can talk later. I can just insist that I engage respectfully with folks, and that needs both of us. When I tried to change the world, all I really ended up changing was myself. But when I changed myself and my approach to the world, the entire world changed around me. That's my theory of change. That's my experience of change. And that's why, although I understand being called Judas and traitor and Buster and all those names like that, I understand it. I don't like it. That would be ridiculous. No one likes having contempt heaped on them. But it led me to examine why I would stay in a state of mind that led me to approach my fellow human creatures with contempt, even though I know good and well that it's a very complicated world with a complicated set of decisions in front of them. And people just have to figure out a binary answer, up or down, black or white, yes or no. There's just no basis for contempt in that. Not really. Not if you're willing to engage with your own humanity and kind of walk away from our chimpanzee instincts to fighting. As I was leaving the union world and the dust was settling in my mind, there was a moment there where I'm aware, I know a little bit about how the world works, and there's a moment there where I could maybe have got a book deal or got some press or something off like a tell-all book. What big labor doesn't want you to know. Former union president tells it all. I was a president of a state chapter of the AFL-CIO. That's a union of unions. I did a 2-year hitch as president of that and a 1-year hitch. I didn't do that. I wrote a couple of essays analyzing my experience on a certain project in union land, and they were a little emotionally warm, but I'll stand by them. But I asked myself, did I sell out a person? Did I try to portray the union as a corrupt, terrible organization? That just wasn't my experience. I didn't do that. I didn't betray people. I changed my mind. Is that a betrayal? I reject that idea. I don't think that ideas are the kind of things that one should use words like loyalty and betrayal with regard to. If an idea is good and sound and it fits in with your values and who you are as a person, you don't need loyalty to hang on to that idea. You just hang on to it. It's your idea. When it doesn't fit in with your values anymore, if you change or your understanding of those ideas change and they don't fit in with who you are anymore and you don't like them anymore, that's not a betrayal. That's a person changing their views. And there's a very famous line from a philosopher: when I find out I'm wrong, I change my mind. What do you do? A little bit different here. I would just keep it simple. When I find out I've changed my mind about something, I've changed my mind about it. That's all. I knew that I lived in a thorny world. I'm a thorny kind of guy at home in the briar patch. Is what there's no better kind of image for what organizing campaigns are like than a thorny briar patch. I'm a thorny guy. One of the reasons that unions appealed to me was that they really tapped into a lot of damage I took out of my childhood, a lot of orientation around managing people and figuring out what people around me were thinking and doing, because that was very important to me as a child and youth. And it played right into that. My own conscience was very clear around, did I do anything that I personally would regard as treachery or betrayal? And I couldn't think of anything. I was just on one side of a complicated election scenario, and now I'm on the other side. That's really as complicated as it is for me right now, presently. And if I remember what it was like to be neck deep in the world of organized labor as I experienced it, constant wrangling and contention and burning of ships and dragging people across finish lines and getting targets and benchmarks and milestones, what that was like for me inside as I related with my fellow human creatures, if I call that to mind, and then I think what my life is like now, where I don't really have contention, I engage with people respectfully, I accept the fact that they're adults who are going to do what they do, and I insist on respectful treatment all the way around. That's the world I live in now. That's easy. That's an easy world to live in. I have easy relations with my fellow human creatures, almost exclusively. If it's a betrayal to step out of that world of knotty, thorny contention and regarding folks as targets, if it's a betrayal to step out of that world and let myself change so that I live in an easy world of respectful adults who are figuring out what they're going to do in a complex situation, I'll take it. If that's a betrayal, then I guess where I come down on it is, you can call me Judas every day of the week, twice on Sundays. It's a good day out there on the trail to the Western Lands. Be careful, Pilgrim.